The following video explores Killer is Dead and will talk in great detail about the story. This includes a near full story recap and will spoil the entire thing. So, spoiler warning for the entirety of Killer is Dead.
Killer is dead.
In late 2013, Grasshopper Studio released Killer is Dead to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, with a PC version launching in May of the following year. In North America, the game was published through Marvelous Entertainment. And hey, look at that! It's Marvelous's old logo. You don't see that every day, or maybe you do. I don't know. Fuck, how am I supposed to know what you guys do every day? With the infamous Suda51 taking a lead writing role and leaving the directing efforts to colleague Hideyuki Shin, those familiar with Suda's work and his distinct eccentricities eagerly awaited the game's launch. Meanwhile, the rest of the world looked on in casual awe of its captivating visual identity, unable to draw much of a conclusion beyond that. With little exception, this was one of Grasshopper's most anticipated games to date. However, upon its release and the reveal of its less than stellar reviews, scoring numerous 5 out of 10s from the larger gaming rags at the time, public interest and sales dwindled faster than COVID-era MCU movies. So here's the deal. I might have written and recorded and edited most of this video before Spider-Man No Way Home came out, and that maybe shook things up a little bit. But I'm gonna keep it in the video anyway, because I like the sound of the line. Though I didn't buy the game on day one myself, I did at least get it sometime within a year of its release, having found a bargain-priced limited edition at the store formerly known as EB Games. Yes, the sales were indeed so bad that special editions were still on the shelves a year into its life. That said, here we are nearly 9 years later, and I'm only just opening it for the first time now. It's a cool little set. A nice-sized box holds the game, a small art book, and a soundtrack in a slim sort of DVD case. The game itself comes with a manual too, and a download code for additional content that I never bothered to install. So if anybody wants to try and see if it's still active, feel free. As you'll see from the resolution, the frame rate, and the abundance of screen tearing in this footage, I am indeed playing the game on Xbox 360. For anybody looking to play today, I would highly recommend not playing here. I also would not recommend playing it on PlayStation 3. If you have an even halfway okay computer, I'd say just play it there and look into unlocking the game's frame rate when you do. But I'm getting off track. Though the performance left quite a bit to be desired, it wasn't the only source of the game's bad reception. In fact, most aspects of the game were subject to scathing criticism. The characters were often viewed as one-dimensional. The story was accused of being underdeveloped or otherwise lost in abstract concepts. The combat was regarded as frustrating, poorly balanced, and shallow. The minigames at best were regarded as not fun, and at worst, downright sexist. The runtime was short, and the soundtrack was lacking. Suda51, as most people who know his name would tell you, is a bit of an acquired taste. But the meal he and his team served up here was one that not only made his critics balk, but many of his fans as well, feeling that he had possibly lost his touch, whatever touch that might have been. And yet, despite all this, today, Killer is Dead is in fact not dead. The game endures, and it's my belief that it was at least a little misunderstood at the time of its launch, albeit through a fault entirely its own. If we look at those criticisms, I can safely say a lot of them are valid. The performance is bad. The runtime is short. The minigames are, well, they're not fun. And the combat, I'll admit, I hated for the first 4 to 5 hours. The control simply isn't good, and it does indeed lack depth. The skeleton is there for an okay time as a relatively button-mashy hack and slash with an emphasis on blocks, dodges, and combo chains. But the execution really hurts. It wasn't until I unlocked the charge cannon, a completely OP AoE BFG, that things really started to feel better. But at that point, it was because I was ignoring the entire intended method of play and just power tripping around it. It's ultimately the rather abstract story and the understated arc of our main character Mondo that I think keeps this game somewhat relevant. With games like this, people like myself tend to come back to them to puzzle new meaning and understanding from the abstract it presents. We seek to find new ways to interpret the often seemingly scattered pieces. Hell, it's exactly why I keep going back to games like Alan Wake. I must have played through that game at least 6 or 7 times just trying to grasp its final line of dialogue. Yet a definitive understanding of of it always eludes me. So when it comes to the story and characters, I feel Killer is Dead deserves a second look. And if you'll bear with me, I'd like to play my favorite Halo game here and reach for some deeper meaning. So today, let's dive in and explore the story, the symbolism, and the characters of Killer is Dead. And of course, once again, there will be spoilers for the entire game. So, let's get into it.
I see. So this is it.
Killer is Dead is quite unique in just how little it informs the player of how its game world actually works. A lot of important details as well are conveyed in a way I'd argue are abstract to a fault. Because of this, the massive holes of information players need to fill in themselves can have people walking away with radically different impressions or understandings of the game, with many failing to come to an understanding at all. But on the surface, there is a very simple narrative unfolding. We play as Mondo Zappa, a name so cool it loops back around to being uncool again. Mondo is a somewhat passive, stoic, and too cool for his own good hired executioner who works for a covert governmental organization run by a half-cyborg man named Brian. Mondo, like Brian, also has some mechanical augmentation by the way of his left arm. How he came to be this way, however, he has no recollection of at the time of starting the journey. Now, the execution agency he works for is tasked with the important task of taking out evil spawns known as wires, which remain largely invisible to the standard human eye. These wires were once human themselves, only they've been tragically transformed after being infected by a powerful force of malice that spills out from the dark side of the moon. As of late, malice or dark energy, or whatever name you want to give it really, has been making its way to Earth in greater quantities and infecting more people than usual. This would be the result of Moon River, the ruler and protector of the moon, being usurped from her frigid rock's throne by a man named David. So of course Moon River visits the execution firm and puts in a request to have David executed. This request then gets passed down to Mondo, who confronts David on the moon. Mondo ultimately loses his battle against David, prompting David to give him a warning that he's not yet strong enough to perform the task. But that's okay. The mechanical arm on Mondo's left side actually has a unique ability to absorb the blood of those he kills, and the more blood he absorbs, the more powerful he becomes. So it would stand to reason he need only get more experienced and return later to do the job properly. Currently, however, having failed the mission, Moon River is unable to return home, and so Mondo graciously opens his home for her, allowing her to move in with him. One could say that Mondo and Moon River are two drifters off to see the world. That's a music joke. But also a play on the game's symbolism. It'll make more sense later, I promise. Mondo and Moon River, however, do not live alone, as Mondo has another roommate named Mika. Mika is a curious and very energetic young girl that sort of just fell in his lap one day. After Mondo discovered she was pretty good at making soft-boiled eggs, a favorite of his, he simply invited her to live with him. At this point in the story, Mondo continues his normal day-to-day work with the firm, until he comes across a new foe named Dolly, a witch that appears in his dreams and seems to have the ability to alter his memories. In overcoming her, Mondo unlocks some of his forgotten past. One day, while Mondo sits at the kitchen table in his mother's house eating her soft-boiled eggs, somebody broke in through the front door wielding a sword, struck his mother down, and cut off Mondo's arm. That man was David, the current occupier of the moon, and who is later revealed to be Mondo's brother. Though David was once a good person, he, like so many others, had become infected by the moon's malice and turned bad. While Mondo bled out on the kitchen floor, a blue spectral unicorn appeared and carried him to the Brian Execution Agency. Once dropped off there, Brian finds Mondo moments from death and outfits him with a mechanical arm, which ultimately saves his life. What this unicorn represents, however, is well beyond me. According to unicornyard.com, yes, that's a real website, a blue unicorn represents faithfulness between partners. But that really comes into question later when current-day Mondo objectifies and dates multiple women at once, with no sense of faithfulness to either one. I guess there's a couple ways to look at it under this context though. You could say that this unicorn was a representation of a character Mondo did indeed have a relationship with at the time he lost his arm. Alternatively, the unicorn represents virtues he once held. Virtues he shed while dealing with the loss of his mother. The unicorn departing him after dropping him off more or less signals a transitional period in his life. Not just transitional in location and physical form, but in mentality as well. Following the death of his mother and the subsequent sealing of his memories, Mondo would become a changed man, though his subconscious desires would hold more sway over his life than he realizes or understands. But we'll revisit that point in a little bit. With his memories returned and new power gained through his growing executioner experience, the time comes for Mondo to take on his brother once more. Only his brother would pay him a visit before their final confrontation. In this visit, the two, in sort, speak in riddles, hammering in the game's incessant metaphor, referring to the various characters in this journey as planets. Mondo being the Earth, Mika the Sun, Moonriver the Moon, and David being Mars, the bringer of war. David essentially tells Mondo that his ultimate desire is to control the Earth, and that if Mondo wants to survive what's ahead, he's going to need to find a bright point of light, essentially a sun, to hang on to and pull him through. In this conversation, he also reveals that the arm Brian Execution had given to Mondo has been absorbing the infected blood of those he killed, and eventually that infection will spread, take over his body, and turn him dark as well. This isn't the first time this has happened to an executioner either. In fact, it would seem this is just the way of the job. Every new executioner, or Brian himself, must end the life of the executioner that came before them after they turned rogue. Mondo was set on this course from the very beginning, but was never told. And unfortunately for him, that wasn't the only setup. Mika, the bright point of light, the sun in his universe, the one thing that could have pulled Mondo through what lies ahead, was revealed to also be a plant, working seemingly against her will, forced into betraying Mondo at the end of it all in servitude to David and Dolly. With nothing left to hang on to in their final confrontation on the moon while dark matter funnels in giant tendrils to the Earth, Mondo defeats his brother but cannot defeat the infection that comes through as a result of it. With the blood of Mars infecting Mondo, the Earth, Mondo cuts off his robot's arm in a last-ditch effort to prevent the total takeover of his body, but it's ultimately not enough to save him. The malice takes over. In effect, David had indeed conquered the Earth. Mondo is last seen reconstructing David and Moonriver's mansion on the moon, but to what end is left unclear. Following this, Moonriver puts in for a new execution request at Brian Execution Agency, and there, the story comes to a close. Also, Moonriver was the bad guy all along. The end. Alright, maybe that needs some further explaining. So earlier I noted that the things Mondo sees in Dolly's dreamscapes had the potential to be fake or implanted memories. However, Dolly also states towards the end of the journey that the things she shows Mondo are far closer to reality than he might believe. In one of these dream sequences, Moonriver is shown to be friends with Mondo as a child. After a brief bit of frolicking, we see a clip of Moonriver drowning while Mondo tries desperately to save her. As Moonriver's head dips beneath the water for the final time and Mondo fails to save her, the specter of Dolly emerges from where she sank. So the question that comes from all of this then is Dolly an extension of Moonriver's more negative or vindictive emotions, or is she just somebody Moonriver has in her employ? The answer, I guess, doesn't really matter. Her effect on the story is the same regardless. Dolly is a tool used to control the direction of Mondo's life and cause him great emotional turmoil through the systematic sealing and revealing of his memories, all to the benefit of Moonriver. But then there's another question. Does this memory, this dream we look upon, mean that Moonriver is actually dead? The answer is more than likely no. Moonriver is part of an ancient line of people who once overseen the Earth until they were forced to the dark side of the moon where they were no longer able to view it. Whether she was there in person or only came to him in dreams, Moonriver enjoyed spending her time with Mondo as a child, at least until that fated day when her and her kind were relocated to where they could no longer gaze upon the Earth, the dark side of the moon. Moonriver drowning in the dream and Mondo being powerless to stop it is most likely a representation of his powerlessness to stop the forces that separated them as kids. Later, when David succumbed to the malice of the dark side of the moon and slayed Mondo's mother, Moonriver, still faithful to Mondo, intervened by the way of her blue unicorn. So let's answer an earlier mystery now. Is the unicorn real or symbolic? It's kind of both. In some way, shape, or form, the unicorn is either an extension of Moon River or a creature that is subservient to her, similar to Dolly. But symbolically, it was also chosen to represent the faithfulness that was meant to exist between the two of them. Okay, stopping right there. Let's back up a little bit. This is the last thing I'm going to add to this video, because quite frankly, I'm getting a little bit tired of thinking about this game and reconsidering everything that I think about it. But this blue unicorn, it's probably wrong to say that this is strictly subservient to Moon River, or that it belongs to Moon River. Even right here, you can see the blue unicorn is referring to Mondo as master. So I think it's best to look at the blue unicorn as some sort of physical manifestation of the bond that Mondo and Moon River, the Earth and the Moon, share together. Neither one of the two own this unicorn specifically, rather it exists because of what the two of them represent together. This is their bond, just kind of, you know, physically manifested. Yeah. The more I talk about this game, the dumber it gets. I understand that. And there's probably like one key piece of information in this entire game that I missed that could completely unravel everything that I want to say about it. But I couldn't very well put this video out there saying that this blue unicorn specifically belonged to Moon River, although that was my initial impression. Following his mother's death, however, Mondo slipped into a darker way of life and did not remain faithful to Moon River. And this is when Moon River becomes the scorned lover and enacts her plan for revenge. At the revelation of Mondo's unfaithfulness, Moon River manipulated David and Mika to push Mondo to his breaking point until he eventually succumbed to the power of the dark side of the moon entirely, allowing Moon River the chance to issue a new contract of execution with Brian to finish Mondo off for good. A convoluted plan for sure, but a sadistic and effective one nonetheless. In the game's terminology, the story is something like this. The moon, forced away from the Earth and upset by the Earth's lack of faithfulness, tossed the sun, the Earth's comforting source of light and warmth, into a black hole, and brought the forces of Mars down upon it to finish it off. In standard terms, a man after losing his mother didn't remain faithful to his long-distance lover, so she fucked with his memories and used his brother to get back at him. It might be a little trite, but I guess hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. It's definitely an odd story told in an unconventional way, and unfortunately, due to its presentation and how vague it leaves certain things, it led many players to feel that there really isn't that much here. But I feel that couldn't be further from the truth. Mondo by far seems to get the most flack though, often regarded as an empty sack of shit sort of character, and well yes, he is a bit of a sack of shit, he's certainly not that empty. To get into exploring him more deeply, however, I'd like to start by looking at one of the game's choices of music. And this isn't a choice of music you need to understand the story, but it's what first set me on this sort of logical path, or this train of thought. At several points throughout the story, they make heavy use of Antonin Dvorak's Symphony No. 9 from the New World 4th movement. While a cool piece of music, I thought for sure it had to have some sort of deeper meaning. It's easy to hear a title like From the New World and then look at the game and be like, yeah, I guess Mondo is in a new world. But I found it a little more interesting that while Dvorak was writing the piece, he was off exploring the world and learning about the different and distinct sounds each culture creates. And though he enjoyed his travels to these exotic places, he had an immense longing to return home. Which leads me to Mondo. While Mondo is off on his globe-spanning quest, taking in new sights, sounds, and even new planes of existence, there's something going on in the background of his desires. And this is where we return to the often laughed at soft-boiled eggs. When Mondo discovered Mika was good at making soft-boiled eggs, his favorite food, often prepared for him by his then late mother, he took Mika into his home not necessarily because he enjoyed her cooking, but because in his travels throughout the New World, the world he found himself in post his mother's passing, there was always that longing to return home. To return to the home where his innocence was still intact and the familiar embrace of his family was always there to offer him security and comfort. Though she was a plant by David in the end, Mika offered a ghost of that security and comfort he once found at his home. So too, I would say, did his conquest over the women in his travels offer him a sense of comfort, finding validation and temporary sanity in their embrace and approval of him. Though that sort of comfort is the opposite and more destructive side of the same coin. Now, that's definitely reading into this gigolo minigame a little too deep. From what I understand, the game was just meant to be a parody of James Bond, but very, very misdirected. But for anybody anybody who wants to look deeper into this, I do think you can find a value for it in that context. Really, Mondo is a character who frequently gives into his more base desires to destructive ends. A character prone to self-sabotage in a subconscious avoidance of accountability or dealing with his complicated emotional baggage. We see this several times throughout the adventure. Mondo time and time again avoids meaningful relationships for more utilitarian ones. He puts his life and body on the line for little personal gain. Even when it comes time to kill David, he does not do it because he's been told or feels that he's ready, but because he learned the truth about him and wanted revenge. Another rather personally destructive action. Every step of the way, Mondo walks further and further into the darkness, with David there to constantly egg him on and take advantage of it. So when we really look at Mondo, I don't think he's quite as shallow as he's often regarded. But like many things in Killer is Dead, the truth probably lies somewhere between the facts presented and interpretation, and the facts provided don't exactly give us much to work with. I'm typically pretty forgiving of games that require the player to fill in some holes and riddle out the truth for themselves. In fact, I'd even say to a degree I prefer when things are like this. But Killer is Dead, at least as far as the information presented in the main campaign goes, I'd say gives too little to the player, and that gulf of missing information can be filled in far too many ways. Hell, it's possible to reinterpret the game so that David doesn't actually exist. He's just an avatar of Mondo's poor coping mechanisms and self-sabotage that awakened when Mondo realized, thanks to his mother's poorly cooked eggs, that she was sick and dying. But yeah, there is a lot you can look at with Killer is Dead, but Mondo is the one thing I wanted to really look at more because I feel like he's heavily overlooked and underappreciated. Yeah, on the surface, there's really not that much to him, and on the surface, it's pretty friggin' hard to tell what's even going on in this game. But if you dig, I think you can find something interesting there. Even if it's not what I found, I think you can find something interesting. And that's the sort of thing that I think keeps Killer is Dead somewhat relevant and talked about today. It's far from a perfect game, but it's not nearly as devoid of quality as I think a lot of people once made it out to be. And I don't think the more offensive content on the surface has to be viewed as just black and white offensive. But that's all I'm gonna say on Killer is Dead. If you guys liked this video or found it helpful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, and subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all of my socials are in the description below, and as always, folks, thanks for watching.